Today we are ranking every weapon for Apex Legends Season 25, no BS, let's go. There's a lot to talk about with Apex's weaponry, but in the bottom tier of F, we have two weapons, and it's the single P20 and the single Mozambique. I still rank these separately because you do need to pick up one before you get a second, and thus, there are times where you will be forced to use the single version and not have akimbos. However, each of these guns are really just not that great. For me, they are both just attachment holders till I find either another light weapon or I do find the akimbo version of both of these guns. I don't think they are per se bad, as the range and time to kill is actually pretty decent on both of these guns. It's just that they are pretty weak when you do compare it to all the other weapons, and they are not going to be what you are going to want to use in the long run. Moving up one tier to D, we now have a few weapons that I deem to be underwhelming for the majority of play in Apex. First is going to be the charge rifle. While the charge rifle can be one of the most satisfying guns if you do manage to connect a 150-meter headshot, beyond this very niche scenario, the gun is just mid for the overall game. Any sniper or marksman is going to be just better and more usable and reliable, whereas if you do have the charge in a close range engagement, it's pretty much GG's. Of course, everything does come down to the user, and I don't think any gun in Apex is truly unusable, but when it does come to the meta, the charge rifle is pretty far away from being it. Just 3 months ago, the EVA 8 was the ruler of Apex's meta, but fast forward to Season 25, the EVA in my eyes is one of the most frustrating weapons to use right now. They completely changed the EVA's function. They lowered the total damage per shot while also increasing the fire rate. You would think this gives the EVA a fair trade-off, but in reality, it kind of just makes the gun pretty weak and pretty much awful and unusable to use in my opinion. If you are actually hugging that enemy and are actually able to get that perfect aim and tracking, you can blitz someone down, but the chances of this happening are far and few between. You would be much better off with something like an accurate SMG or a bigger hitting secondary like a Mastiff, so you can actually swap to your secondary and finish the enemy off. Rounding out the D tier, we do have the RE45, which is also in a pretty odd spot these days. The only thing the RE has going for it is going to be the pure handling and swap to speed. I like using the RE45 with something like sniper rifle, so I can have that fastest handling and quickly get someone down when they do push in. But for the most part, the RE45 does not get players down as fast as the R9, and it does not have the same effectiveness as something like a Mastiff. The RE45 has always been deceiving for many, as it feels like it shreds, but it's just not as competitive as most of the SMGs. Ever since the RE45 lost hammer points, it's been an underperformer. We now have a singular weapon in C tier, which I deem to be a gun that is just fair or okay, not bad by any means, but also not great at all when you do compare it to the weapons above it. I was very close to putting the Havoc in D tier just to show how far it has fallen from the pre-care package version, but I couldn't quite do it, as the Havoc's time to kill is actually still fair. It was released in Season 25 in such a bad state to the point where Respawn has already buffed the damage by 1. This was helpful, but overall I do find the Havoc to be pretty weak. It lacks close range power, it lacks long range accuracy due to the recoil, and it does not really have the same brilliant damage per mag that it used to. If the turbocharger was in the game, I can see a scenario where this gun is ranked higher, but for the majority of players, you are going to have a difficult time forcing the gun to work. As we move into the B tier, do not forget to hop into my community Discord if you need to ask me any questions or if you want to find some dedicated teammates to play with, because playing with randoms kind of blows. B tier for me are a handful of weapons which I deem to be good or at least decent. They aren't per se meta, but they can compete at times, whether it's early game or in more unique situations. In a very similar line as the Havoc, the Bocek is also one of those guns that came out of the care package, but instead, it has been years since the Bocek saw a return to the ground. The Bocek for the first week was pretty terrible, and I had a lot of high hopes for it, as the explosive arrows I thought could make it unique and a fun option like charging up the rampage, but it was just too weak. However, Respawn buffed the damage by 10, which already gives it a little bit more kick, but I find the bow to just not quite have what it needs to be competitive with the other marksmans out there. We are in a long range meta for sure right now, and I would rather have a higher damage per shot potential of the 30-30, or even the pressure you can apply with the G7 Scout and its fire rate. The base ammo on the Bocek is also pretty low, and I find you still have that same care package problem where it will run out of rounds if you are in a slower end game. Bocek isn't bad, but I don't think it's competitive to go any higher than the soft B tier placement that I do have it at. Second to the Bocek is the previous supreme ruler of the universe, the Mozambique akimbos. The Mozambique akimbos actually have a pretty decent time to kill, but they do lack the overall damage per shot potential of a Mastiff, and they are not quite as competitive as the P20 akimbos or even a few of the SMG options if you are running and gunning. Mozams I think are a little slept on, even though I have placed them in the lower B tier. If you do not mind losing a few more inventory slots for the extra shotgun ammo that you are going to have, they still have a place for some, but overall they're just not as good as they used to be. I would not mind seeing the magazines get buffed back to 12, so you have a little more total damage per mag, which would help it out in team fights. Our first SMG is going to be the Alternator. The Alternator for me continues to be a good all-around option for Apex's early game, where if I find this thing off the drop, I'm actually feeling pretty good. It's easy to control, has great range, has good damage per mag. The only thing is, its time to kill is fairly mediocre when you do compare it to a lot of the other weapons above it. It's a gun I like recommending to beginners if you are struggling, but you will need to understand that the Alternator does have a limited amount of potential when you are in a close range one-on-one with P20s or an R9 and a handful of other weapons. Really, you're just going to be outclassed. Second to this is going to be the Prowler, and almost in the opposite sense, I find the Prowler to be absolutely terrible off the drop, and it more or less requires a heavy mag for it to be an effective option. The Prowler doesn't have the best time to kill, but it makes up for it with its larger mag size, which lends itself nicely to being able to knock 2 enemies without needing to reload. The Prowler I do think is a little forgotten these days, but if you want an option that will help you take on multiple enemies at once, has a fair amount of competitiveness in team fights, and you don't mind a burst SMG, it's a fair option. Initially, I actually had the L-Star ranked a tier lower, but after using it for a little bit this season, I find that the L-Star is actually pretty competitive in the close to mid-range. The no reload I think is a little bit of a gimmick. It kind of always has been, as you still need to stop shooting, but a well-trained hand can have a lot of success with this feature. If you want to continually apply pressure, I find that it's pretty nice for this. It's just the amount of ammo the L-Star chews through is actually absurd. I also find the Nemesis to be the much better all-around energy gun, and the L-Star being an LMG does mean you are going to be a little bit slower in close range fights when it does come to strafing due to that poorer handling. I'm like a broken record already at this point, but the L-Star isn't bad, it's just there are better choices. Kind of on an equal footing as the L-Star, I do put the Devotion also in B tier. However, the Devo is a little bit more power towards being an alternate close range spray and pray weapon, whereas the L-Star is a little bit more of a well-rounder. If you can manage to get a fair amount of attachments on the Devo, it can really start shredding. I just think the barrier to entry is pretty tough. I think if you are rocking ballistic, you can't put that Devo in a sling. This weapon almost becomes like a high A or S tier gun at this point, but outside of this, there's just a little bit too much needed to make the thing really excel with all those attachments. The Devotion, if you aren't aware now, does get a turbocharger if you max out the attachments, which is why it is so effective as a slung weapon on ballistic. All around, I do think the Devo is amazing if you can get it fully kitted. It's just a lot to get there, but I can see actually the Devo getting more use as the season goes on as well. The Wingman sees a little buff this season in the overall time to kill and the overall use potential due to it getting a fire rate buff and the skull piercer. I think the Wingman is a little forgotten at this point, and while it definitely is usable early on in matches, it does falter in later games. The Wingman can quickly 2 or even 3 tap a lot of players if you are accurate, which can be unexpected. The problem and what is holding the Wingman back is the fact that we are in such a deep long range meta right now, where the accuracy of something like a G7, a 30-30, maybe even a longbow or a sentinel is going to just outclass someone using a sniper-like pistol. Obviously, the Wingman functions completely differently from these guns, and it's more of a close range gun, but at this point, something like a Nemesis or an R9 is going to be much more reliable at this range as well. Capping out the B tier is going to be the longbow. The longbow right now is honestly better than it has been, and snipers across the board had some limb shot damage buffs, plus the skull piercer makes the bow a little bit more usable when you are connecting to the head. That being said, the longbow is still outclassed by most of the other marksmen or the sentinel, and it keeps its ranking a little bit lower because of this. If you have a teammate running both the G7 and 30-30, then splitting ammo types up can be nice, and this is where the longbow will come into effect. It's not a bad gun, it's just there are better mid to long range poking options. If you are enjoying this video, do me a huge favor and hit that like button, and drop a comment down below with what meta you would like to see next in Apex. Do you want SMGs to return to power, or maybe something like LMGs that we haven't had in a long time? A tier for me contains a set of weapons that are more or less all usable in what I deem to be amazing in Apex. That being said, they still might be a little bit outclassed by other weapons in S tier, but you really can't go wrong with either of these guns as well. Spitfire continues to be a pretty reliable all-around weapon in Apex. It's had so much better and worse days, but right now it's a good pub pusher weapon, where the magazine size lends it nicely to fighting multiple enemies at once. It's not competitive in the true TTK sense, so if you want a ranked option to excel in a one-on-one fight, I would not use it for this. But the Spitfire's hipfire, close range ADS, and mid range, I find all to be pretty effective and pretty easy to use. Of course, you will have that lower handling again because it is an LMG, which is a fair trade-off for one of Apex's largest mag size weapons. A continual great option in Apex is going to be the Flatline. The Flatline, in my eyes, slightly misses out on being an S tier gun simply because of the overall range and effectiveness that it does bring. It's kind of the prototypical gun that can be used in the close to mid range, but isn't necessarily at the top of the game for either of those ranges. It will lose out against something like a Nemesis at mid range, and it's not going to beat something like an R9 at close range. I find the Flatline to be one of, if not my favorite pub gun in Apex, so if you want that flexibility, kind of like the Spitfire, then I absolutely would give it a try again. In a very similar vein as a flatline, we also have Apex's most traditional assault rifle, the R301. The 301 is the bread and butter of Apex in a lot of ways, plays out very similar to a flatline, but it has much better recoil control, which means you can have a little bit more range where you're not going to have quite as good performance in the very close ranges. For all the same reasons as a flatline, it misses out on S tier due to the fact that it's not really excelling at anything in particular. But that being said, there's a ton of pros and lots of great players who still use the R301 to this day as their main gun because it lets them focus on the other part of Apex's larger macro picture rather than needing to worry about the recoil control. Our final ground sniper is up, and it is the Sentinel sniper rifle. The Sentinel gets the highest placement of the snipers due to a few factors, but the biggest thing it brings to the table is the largest headshot and one-shot potential. A charged Sentinel off the drop can one-hit anyone with gray armor, which is actually massive. Beyond this, being able to do 150 plus damage hit in the late game gives you the most power to actually make a play on an enemy, as they have to use a Phoenix kit or pop both a battery and a med kit. There is a little bit less usability to farm damage here and apply pressure to say like a marksman, but if you want that pure raw damage potential in a mini Kraber, this is definitely going to be it. A weapon I continue to swear by is going to be the Rampage. Much like the Flatline and the R301, the Rampage doesn't necessarily excel at close or long ranges, but its all-around use is absolutely incredible. It doesn't need any attachments, it's a breeze to control, and it can work pretty well in close range fights if you are okay with carrying extra thermites at least. I find that if you are a fuse player, then carrying tons of thermites and running a Rampage is actually awesome. If you are a ballistic main and you want this thing in your sling as well, this thing can be very good. The Rampage is one of the most solid weapons in the game right now if you don't want one of the burst meta weapons like a Nemesis, but you still want that close to mid-range, long-range, powerhouse type of gun. Beyond the care package Peacekeeper, the Mastiff is going to be the best ground shotgun secondary that you can use these days. It has the highest damage potential to swap to and one-tap someone down, and it's even pretty good in teamfights due to the ability to reload a single round at a time rather than needing to wait for the entire mag to reload. This increases your use and decreases your downtime. I flirted with putting the Mastiff in the S tier, but it lacks time to kill, and you won't be as competitive if you do run into someone with an R9 or a Kimbo P20s. That being said, there's not a lot of what I deem to be powerhouse close range weapons in Apex right now, so it's absolutely a fair option, and if a Kimbo P20s get nerfed, this thing could bump up the S. We wrap up the A tier with two SMGs, and the first is going to be the Car. I'll state that the R99 and the Car's time to kill is pretty close, but the R9 is going to be the better choice out of these, and thus the Car does lose out a little bit. Now, if you are looking to split up ammo types, and if you do find a heavy mag off the rip, Car is honestly going to be good enough for you to use. Not a lot more to say about the Car these days. The flexibility continues to be the #1 thing going for it, and it is a great option. Our last A tier SMG is going to be the Volt. Truthfully, I think the Volt is one of, if not my favorite secondary close range weapon right now for a handful of reasons. But the negatives going for the Volt is, again, it doesn't eliminate your opponents as fast as a few other close range options. But for me, it makes up for this in the total damage per mag it can do, the ease of use, and the way it performs with no attachments. Energy ammo is also a slight knock as you can't carry as much, and I find that you can easily rip through rounds as well. The Volt is a true all-around contender. It's kind of like the R301 of SMGs, and if you do want an amazing SMG that is easy to use, this is going to be the one. As we move on to the few S tier weapons, I want to give a quick shout out to my channel members, and if you want to go the extra mile to support me and my content, consider becoming a member of the channel. Much appreciated. At the top of the game, we have those weapons that I more or less deem to be the meta guns. Our first S tier gun is actually a set of weapons, and it's all of the care package guns. I figured we would just loop all of them together since you don't really have control over which one you will get and when you will get it. The Kraber is the top dog, only weapon that can one-shot an enemy down. This thing farms damage, and if you do connect your shots, it's the best thing for opening engagements. The Peacekeeper, in my eyes, is the best secondary gun in the game. It has the ability to two-tap any player down. It has the best swap to and one-tap someone down if needed as well. And lastly, the new care package gun, the triple take, is absolutely absurd. The choke is blitzing fast, the damage is superb, the range is superb, the headshot accuracy is also incredible, the fire rate is also really good. If you see this thing and you're not just running and gunning in pubs, you absolutely gotta pick up the triple take. Probably the best gun in the game right now. Our first meta assault rifle is up, and it's something new to S tier, at least for this season, and it is the Hemlock. The Hemi had a few buffs over the last couple seasons, from mag size and even getting the gun shield this season, and where it has ended up is pretty solid. Unlike the Nemesis, the single shot potential that the Hemlock does bring you is going to have a little bit more range potential, where the close range and even mid-range bursting is pretty good as well. Some do not like the Hemlock simply because it is a burst, but honestly, we've been in this like burst AR meta for 2+ years at this point, so if you don't want to use a marksman, this is kind of it. And second to this is going to be that aforementioned Nemesis. I think the Nemi slightly edges out the Hemlock because it is truly the fastest killing assault rifle when you do get this thing spun up, and even not fully spun up, it is still quite good. The 4-shot burst I find can make it even better in the close range, and the biggest negative on the Nemesis in my eyes is, again, it is an energy gun. Lots of people are using marksman and tap guns as well, so you might struggle a little bit at the further ranges, but if you can excel at the recoil control of the Nemesis, I find this pretty much to be a no-factor scenario. The Nemesis is going to be your best pub AR by far, so if you aren't a ranked warrior, this is definitely going to be for you, and if you are even playing ranked, if you are playing a little bit more aggressive, this is kind of it. I decided to leave out my god tier category this season, which I have done in the past, but if I had to have it, I would say the next few guns are the ones that would be in that tier. The first is going to be the 30-30 repeater. I think the 30-30 is the best pressure and damage farming gun in the game right now, and if it's not the best, it's like a 1A and 1B option with the G7 Scout. The 30-30 getting Skull Piercer honestly feels completely unnecessary, but getting 130 damage headshot as you open an engagement is massive, and being able to heady body anyone with blue or lower armor is so good. A heady and 2 body shots is also going to eliminate any player in the game. Heavy ammo isn't too bad to come by, and overall I think the 1 round reload at a time lets you have a little bit less downtime when you do compare it to the G7 Scout. That being said, let's talk about the G7. The Scout is absolutely a top tier weapon right now, and it has been for like 2 to 3 seasons at this point. Its fire rate combined with the headshot damage and even body shot damage means you can dish out quick damage and do it at its faster fire rate that does catch a lot of enemies off guard. The flexibility and the overall forgiveness of this thing is great as well. I think the G7 Scout is a little better at the close ranges when comparing it to the 30-30 repeater. Light ammo is also plentiful right now due to akimbo users, and if you want one of the best damage, pressure, and overall eliminating weapons of the game, the G7 Scout is probably the one you should be going with, especially if you are not confident in your shot. We now have our best close range and secondary guns, and the first is the return of the R99. Yes, the R9 is the best SMG in the game right now, and honestly, it's been a long time since SMGs have been considered a top contender in Apex's meta. We've been in the P20 shotgun and Mozambique meta for almost a year at this point. I don't really know what to say about the R9. It's the fastest killing SMG that you can bring to the table. The recoil isn't bad, although worse than it was a couple years ago. And if you haven't practiced your R9 spray in a while, you need to, as I can kind of see the R99 being our top dog for the season if the next weapon does get another nerf, which I could see happening. And the combo of guns that really needs no introduction at this point is going to be my #1 choice for Apex Legends close range meta, and it is the P20 Akimbos. I will state that Akimbo saw some nerfs last season, and the magazine nerfs of this season do nerf the total magazine damage that you can dish out, but even with this nerf, I kind of think they need a little bit more of a pushback still. The total damage you can do is still great, and the time to kill is absurd. The fact that you can basically main these guns in fights is the key factor, and until another weapon gets buffed or they do get knocked down a little bit, this is going to be the top close range meta weapon in Apex Legends. Be sure to check out my legend ranking video on screen if you want more on Apex's meta, but until next time, happy gaming, Legends.